Hello, Ken Spriggs here with part one of the 2001 Space Station V from Moebius that was just released. Doing some preliminary looking into a way to rotate the station on a motor and get it to rotate like we see in the film. If you've seen recently, Lou Del Maso from Aztec Dummy did a build of this, and he did get his to rotate. It turned out really, really good. He had some really ingenious ideas on how to make that happen. He also created a mask set for the windows, which I'll be using, and to light those up as well on the completed ring of the station. So I started doing some initial review and looking at 2001 A Space Odyssey scenes with the space station. I've seen this film literally hundreds of times, and certainly parts of it I've watched over and over while building these different models. When I built the Discovery, the Ares 1B, the Clavius moon base, that kind of thing. Just getting some ideas, getting some shots, and just doing my research by watching the scenes, and sometimes taking pictures from my television in order to see how something's painted. In this particular situation, I wanted to get an idea of how fast the station is rotating. And the general consensus, which can be kind of confusing, is that it rotates about 1 revolution per minute. Some people are calculating that based on how fast a real space station would rotate to create artificial gravity with centrifugal force, but I'm just looking to match what it looks like in the film, how it looks. So it's really tricky to get an idea of how fast it's moving, because we don't see it just sitting there spinning around for an entire revolution. We see it moving, and we see close-ups. It gets closer and it gets further away, and it's moving, and the space clipper is moving towards it. So it's really hard to get an idea. So I had to basically time with a stopwatch sometimes half of a revolution or sometimes a quarter of a revolution and multiply it. And I came up with roughly 45 to 48 seconds for a full rotation. The main way that I determined it was when he's inside the station, he's in the phone booth, and the Earth is rotating around outside the window. And I got like a half revolution of that and doubled it. So I'm going with a 1 revolution per minute rotation, which I think will be accurate. But when I was looking at it, I was obviously scrutinizing the video to try to figure out not only its speed, but what direction it's traveling in. And when I say direction, what I'm saying is the station itself has the front side, which is the built side, which is complete. And that's where the docking bay is that the space clipper goes into. The other side is what we call under construction. That is not done. And that's what we consider the back of the station. That's what I'm going to call the back of the station or the front of the station. So when I talk about a direction, a rotational direction, I'm talking about clockwise or counterclockwise. When I'm looking at the front of the station that is completed, where the docking bay is, where the space clipper goes into. And that's the part that we see mostly. We see it from that direction. It does switch to the back a few times, but generally what we're looking at is the front of the station. So I found a curious thing, and I'm sure other people have noticed it, but I've never heard anybody mention it. I did find an article on it, which I'll put into the description of this video, that talks about it. But the station changes direction several times, in fact. It starts out, when we first see the station appear, it is going clockwise. The first 2 scenes that we cut away, it's rotating clockwise. So when we're looking at the station, it's moving in a clockwise motion. Then a moment later, we get we're looking closer to the ring, and we back up a bit, and it's going counterclockwise. And it does this several times throughout the scenes that we see. So very curious. And I wasn't sure at first. I just went back and looked at it several times to be sure that that's what was happening. I went out and Googled it. I only found really one article that talked about it. And ironically, they went ahead and showed additional information that the same thing happens right before the station is shown when we see Moonwatcher, the ape throwing the bone up in the air. It starts out in one direction, and then it cuts away and it comes back and it's reversed. So I don't know what Kubrick was going for. I do not believe that these were mistakes. There are several things that happen within Kubrick's films that people consider to be continuity errors or mistakes. They're not mistakes. There may be mistakes in the film, but these things that people often point out, they're not mistakes. He did them on purpose just to kind of throw you off and disorient you, apparently, in what you're looking at, since in space there's no up and down and sideways and all that kind of thing. A few other examples would be the stewardess in the Ares 1B. We see that she's on the passenger level, which is horizontal. She clearly goes up in the elevator to another level, which is also horizontal. She then goes and gets into the ring and walks completely upside down and walks to the left. And then the next scene, she appears in the doorway for the cockpit, which we know is straight up. So why she wouldn't go straight up and down and walk to the left. She would go horizontal and walk straight up. But again, I believe, and I have no confirmation of this, but I believe that Kubrick was just trying to give us the idea that it's confusing and we're not sure what's up and down and that sort of thing. Sort of like in the Discovery, when we have the back hallway and we have the cockpit, which is off kilter by like 45 degrees or something. And the pilots would be looking straight up out of the front cockpit window, which would be kind of strange. But he's just trying to demonstrate and show you that in a spaceship where there's no gravity, you wouldn't have to have everything on a horizontal plane, which is often what happens. So I don't think this is a mistake. In addition, once we go inside the station with Heywood Floyd, we see two shots where the Earth is rotating outside the window of the station, and it also reverses. We don't see it stop and reverse. It literally just one scene we see the Earth is moving one direction, then they go and they do some things, then he goes and makes a phone call, and it's going the opposite direction. Space Station didn't stop and go in the opposite direction. So it's one of those weird quirks. I'm sure that he did it on purpose. And don't get me wrong, I am by no means criticizing 2001. It's a masterpiece, nor am I saying, like I said, I'm not saying he made a mistake. I think he deliberately did this. It's just a very odd thing that he's changing the rotation of the station. So if you're wondering which direction it rotates either clockwise or counterclockwise. It changes. So let's go ahead and take a look at the film. I'm going to show you a few clips and demonstrate this and show you what I'm talking about. All right, so we're going to go through the sequence of the station that we see. I'll cut in the middle when we go to the interior for the space clipper because we don't really need to see that. But so we'll just kind of walk through and we'll talk about the direction, the rotation. Sorry for the reflection myself in my television. I'm just filming this right from my television. And I turned down the sound so I don't get a copyright strike. So here we go. So initially we're going to go ahead and see the station. There it is. Now clearly clockwise. And again from the front, there's the under construction ring. Here's the completed ring. This is the docking bay that the clipper is going to be going into. All right, and it doesn't last a minute, so it's hard to get a good timing of it. And then plus we're zooming in on the station and we get our first look at the inside of the docking bay, which is kind of cool. Now we cut over to the clipper. You'll just have to imagine the Blue Danube playing in your head. All right, let me cut this and skip to the next part. All right, so we're back to the station. Again, still clockwise. Now suddenly, we get in closer, it's moving counterclockwise. And obviously we're still looking at the completed front of the station versus the under construction ring. So clearly it's now going counterclockwise. And the space station is going towards it. So I don't think it was a continuity error where they filmed the station and didn't reverse or something. It's moving towards it. So it was obviously a deliberate choice. And again, we're inside the cockpit of the station, approaching the front where it's going to enter the docking bay, and it's going counterclockwise. Likewise, this graphic also going counterclockwise for the space station. Then we look inside of the station, looking out, and with the stars rotating clockwise, That means from this perspective, the station's going counterclockwise. But remember, we're looking outside, so if we reversed it, it's going clockwise again, at least for this shot. Just imagine that we're looking from the back of the station outward. So if the station's going counterclockwise from the back, it's going clockwise in the front. And then we see the clipper approaching, matching the docking rotation, and coming towards the center. All right, so now we're in the back. So same thing, it's moving clockwise in the back, which means in the front, it's clearly moving counterclockwise because it would be reversed. And we see the clipper positioning itself. And we never do ever see the clipper close to the opening. And then again from the inside, now the stars are moving clockwise, so we're going counterclockwise, obviously. And the same thing here. All right, so it switches a couple of times, but definitely ends up on counterclockwise. All right, so now we move inside of the station. Haywood Floyd comes in, and he continued the same thing. It's only two different shots, but, well, it's actually a few cuts away. So there it is, there's the Earth. Now, as you can see, if you just track it along the outer edge of the window, it's moving in a clockwise motion, which on the outside of the station means the station is moving counterclockwise. All right, so we see that there. He comes up, he gets greeted. So I'm gonna cut here because they go in and do the little identification thing, but we'll come right back once they start moving to his phone call. All right, so they finished the identification. So they're walking down the hallway, and I'll talk about in a moment. So the curvature of this floor indicates that they're basically, from our perspective, upside down in the station, and this is the outer part of the station because that's where the centrifugal force would be. Okay, so we're moving along, and now there's a little phone booth. And the only place where there would be any windows showing the station would be on the side that's facing the Earth. All right, so now he goes into the phone booth. No reason to believe that they went to another side of the station in those few minutes, nor would that make a difference. Only one side of the station would be facing the Earth. So here we go now. Now, if you look at the way the Earth is tracking around the edge of the window, it's going counterclockwise, which means that now the station is moving clockwise. A few moments ago, it was moving the opposite direction. And it just stays this direction the whole time that he's in this phone booth, talking to his daughter. And this scene coming up here in a moment is the one that I used to try to track the speed of the rotation, because it would be the same inside of the station as it would be on the outside of the station. So what I did was, I don't know if it's this shot or the next one, but it stays long enough. It stays at least 30 seconds. So yeah, it's the next one. None of the shots stay a full minute to get the time of rotation. So what I did was I timed a half a rotation and just doubled it. It came up with an approximate. Same thing with the space station on the outside. Okay, so what I did was, when the Earth gets about halfway, right about here, I started a timer, let it come all the way around to the other side, so it's the complete opposite, which would be a half a rotation, and then I stopped it, and it's about 20, 23, 24 seconds, and then I just doubled it to be about 40, 45, 48, so right about here. It's not perfect, but it certainly gives me an idea of how fast it's rotating. So that was giving me an estimate of about 1 to 1.5 rotations per minute. So, all right, so we'll look at one more thing. We'll look at the sequence with the bone thrown up in the air at the beginning. All right, and then finally we'll go back a little bit and we'll look at the beginning of these scenes where we see Moonwatcher with the bone as he discovered to use it as a weapon, and he throws it up in the air. And the same thing happens here. It only happens very quickly, but it changes rotation as well, which they pointed out in the article. All right, so he throws it up in the air. It's clearly rotating counterclockwise. Cuts away, now it's clockwise. and then we go to the future. And it doesn't match up with anything rotating in the future, so very hard to say what he was trying to do with that, but clearly he kind of threw some little things in there to make us think. A little thing I noticed, which I thought was kind of cool, watch these lights here. They just come on. I thought I had misnoticed it, but they literally just come on. Something was going on and it just came on. All right, enough of these videos here. All right, so definitely a quandary. I'm going to make my station rotate counterclockwise, and I'll show you here in a moment that I'm working on the motor, and right now I have one that rotates at 1 RPM. It does look pretty good to me as far as how fast it's rotating in the film, and I think that's going to work well for that. If anybody's heard anything else about Kubrick actually talking about him changing the direction of the station, put it in the comments. Please don't flood the comments with your theories and ideas. I have theories and ideas. I'm not going to state any of them because I don't know. And that's not what I'm looking for. I haven't found anything that says Kubrick said, I did this and this is why I did it and this is what I'm imitating. I don't think he did, because he doesn't really tell us. He doesn't really talk about why he does the quirky things he does sometimes, but he does it in order to kind of disorient you and create a certain thing that he wants in that scene. He's a genius. He was a genius. His 2001 is a masterpiece. So again, no criticism of it whatsoever. I just find it very interesting and intriguing, especially since I've watched this film literally hundreds of times. Never noticed that. Of course, I was never focusing on which direction the station was rotating in until I started building this model, so I had no reason to notice it. But that's also pretty clever that he managed to put it in there, and I don't think it's like readily understood or known that it does in fact change rotational direction. So, all right, let's go ahead and take a look at how I'm going to rotate my Moebius model of the station. All right, so I'm working on the concept of rotating the station using a motor and getting it to look the way it does in the film. So I got this motor. I got a couple actually. I have another one coming from Amazon. This is a 1 RPM motor. It's a 12-volt motor. So what it does is it goes into this little part that they give you, and then it just goes into this connection or similar connection that you can plug a 12-volt adapter in. It's a DC motor. So I have my variable power adapters that I have that go up to 12 volts. And then this little connector here. Ultimately, once I get the final base done, this is just a piece of wood that I cut. It's a little bit thicker than 1/8 of an inch. Probably the thickest I can go is a 1/4 inch. And you can see I have enough meat with that part sticking through. These are 2 flanges that I also got from Amazon, and I bolted them together, and it has a 7mm internal part inside there, which is the thickness of the part of the motor, and so that will rotate. I'm also looking at some other ideas of some parts. Oh, and I just have it screwed into this piece of wood right now. It's not terrible, but I don't really need all this extra thickness. If I could get a flange maybe just this thick that has the little connectors. What it has is those little holes. It has some Allen wrench threaded parts that go inside, and it tightens down onto the rod. You can see the motor part down there in the middle. You can see a little bit of it underneath. And then the other side of the rod is going to go into here and come out and be attached to the station, so that the part on the station that rotates will be permanently attached and glued in very, very firmly into the station, and then it'll be removable. So I can loosen these up and I can remove it and put it back in and tighten it up when I want to do that. And meanwhile, the motor itself and these flanges will be attached, or if I get different ones, to the wood base that's going to be upright, and the station's going to be, I want it to kind of be sticking out but coming down just a little bit, and then rotating, of course, on the rod or the tube, whatever I end up using. So I could not find a piece of brass rod or tube that is 7 millimeters. The closest I got was this one, which is a 1/4 inch or 6.35 millimeters. This is a solid rod. It's very sturdy, very thick. I looked around at some other places, some of the big box like Lowe's. Just couldn't find anything 7 millimeter. It does work though. It's a little looser in this opening, but you can tighten it down, and with a rod it works just fine. So what I did was I mocked up a part of the station onto a brass tube, the same thickness. Let me go ahead and get that connected, and then I'll show you how that's going to work. Actually, before I do that, let me just show you. So I attached this to my power supply, 12 volts. And it's going to sound louder on the camera, but it's just buzzing a little bit. It's not really a loud motor. And once it's on the piece of wood and it's mounted and the station's on it, you're really not going to hear it very well at all unless you get close to it. It's a very quiet motor. And mostly it's just the gears moving around inside because it steps it down to be whatever the speed is, to be a 1 RPM motor. Oops, let me show you that. I don't know if I went over the specs on it. Yeah. So it's 12 volts DC, 4 watts. It's 0.8 to 1 RPM. And apparently it varies based upon, I guess, the hertz, like 50 to 60 hertz. I'm not sure how to tell what those hertz are on my adapter. Maybe the watts, I'm not quite sure. But when I first hooked it up, it didn't move, and I was worried that it just was locked up or seized up. Once I attached this on, giving it a little bit of torque, something to move it, it started moving. So I guess it has to be attached to something. It's a high torque motor, which is what I wanted because it's got to move this whole station around, and I don't want it burning out the motor because it's of too much weight. That and the brass tube and or rods that will be connected to it. So it should work fine. I think what it's generally supposed to be used for oftentimes is a microwave motor. Moves the plate around inside the microwave. They have an AC version, which I mistakenly bought first. I bought the AC version of it by mistake. I got that about a week ago, and I was testing it. It wouldn't work either, but now I think I understand why. It didn't have any torque on it. It didn't have anything that it was trying to move, so it hummed and it buzzed like it was operating, but nothing was moving. So I was worried when I got the second one, like, what's this company selling? Just non-working motors. But thankfully, once I put this on, it started moving. So it's moving pretty good. All right, so now let me go ahead and put this onto, or put the part of the space station onto it and show you how that's going to look rotating. All right, so I'm testing the rotation of what the actual model is going to look like when going around at the 1 RPM. So I went ahead and I used this piece of basswood, and it's just taped to the station. The station is glued together, but well, actually it's not glued together. I think I just taped it together, but it's only half of it. It's only the front half. Just to get the idea of the actual model, this is the widest part of the ship, of course, or the station. So it's easier to get an idea of it looking correct with the rotation when I have the actual part of the model on there. So I just have this taped in piece of wood, as you can see. And I had a piece of this, it's brass tube. I drilled a hole into this and glued it in place with some 5-minute epoxy in order to be able to rotate it. Let me go ahead and tilt this up a bit. I have a little bit of a space background, and I'm going to put it on it and show you how that's going to look rotating around. All right, and here is my test using the 1 RPM motor in the front finished ring of the ship. So I did a quick timing with a stopwatch. It's just maybe a few seconds shy of 1 RPM, a few seconds shy of a minute. And they did state with the motor that it's between 0.8 and 1 RPM, depending on the, I guess, the watts, the amps, or whatever it is that cause it to spin. But I really like how fast it's moving. It's not overly fast, but it's not too slow either. And when you get closer, like they do in the movie, like when it comes up to a part of the ring, it gives you the perception of this moving a lot faster, because you're seeing the part of it that's going by you quickly. When you pull back and you see it from a distance, the whole ring, it seems to be a little slower. But of course, the whole thing is moving at the same uniform pace. All right, I have one other motor coming here in another week or so that's 1.5 RPMs, or maybe slightly slower. So we'll test it and we'll see. But the proof of concept works just fine. I also want to look at getting some other flanges, just because those are a little bigger. If it was a smaller flange, maybe a 2-part flange that just attached the 2 rods together. In addition, I haven't been able to find the 7mm tube or rod. As I said, it's just slightly thinner. I want to see if I can order some of that, possibly from Amazon. Okay, but looking pretty cool. It's definitely gonna do what I want it to do, and it's actually quite quiet. I can't really hear the motor at all humming unless I get closer to it. It might sound louder on the video because it picks up the ambient sound, but it's a very quiet motor. Just a little bit of buzzing, but nothing real noticeable unless you get close to it. So, okay. All right, so I want to show one more thing that I got. So I want to obviously light this as well. So I'm going to have lights in this outer ring, and also in the docking bay on the finished side, not in the construction side, just in this side. The construction side, I'm going to obviously have this rod from the back going through it and attached inside the station so that it's rotating, but it'll be removable. So I'll be able to remove those little Allen bolts in there, take them out, remove the entire station. Imagine this tube just glued inside of the main part of the station. The whole station can be removable. But in order to light it, I'm going to need some power to those. So I thought about doing something with a battery. I thought about trying to get something, let me show you to maybe have this part removable. But unfortunately, you can't, because right here are all the spokes going out to the rest of the station. So you can't take off the whole front of the station. And if I just had the front pulled off, that's going to be hard, because I'm going to have the docking bay inside of there and have lights in it. It's just not really workable to pull this out and have a battery. And I don't want to do a panel or something like that. Just stick this one here. To do that, sorry. So I'm going to have to wire outside of the station, just like I'm doing for the motor. And the problem is, if I have wires inside the station and I take them out and down through here, the station's rotating, it's going to get tangled up and it isn't going to work. So what I've got is this device called, hold on a second, called a slip ring. Got this from Amazon. So this is designed for this very kind of thing. So what you have is, you have this set of wires that are attached to the inner ring, and it moves around independently, as you can see, from the outer part of the thing. It moves really nicely too. It moves very smooth. You can see some metal in there, so there's obviously a connection that is maintained. And then that connection goes out to these two wires, which are stationary. So what you would have is, you would have one set rotating around while the other set stays stationary. And it can rotate completely around, nothing hanging it up. So it'll just keep rotating around like this. So let me show you, let me take this off and show you how this is going to work. I don't know exactly the final engineering, but I have a good idea of it. All right, so I took the flange off and I just have the slip ring onto the part of the motor that turns, and it's a 7mm opening, and so is the motor. So what you can see is that inner ring is moving, the outer ring is stationary. But because of how this is designed, it's still giving power through the wires. It's still making a connection. So this set of wires that you see moving would actually be attached to the rod that comes up to the space station, whereas the other wires would stay attached stationary going back into the base. And it's not on there solid, so it's not making an absolute connection. But you can see this moves independently, nice and smooth. So that's the idea. Let me go ahead and unplug that. All right, so if I didn't want this removable, this would be fine. I would literally just be attaching this directly onto here, cementing the inner ring onto the motor and the rod coming out and so on. But I also need some way to attach the outer rod, so that's not going to happen. But what I'll end up doing is, when I have this on here, or if I get another one, I'll have a rod coming out or a tube, and hopefully I can get a 7mm. So this will come in down and it'll attach probably, well, it won't attach onto this. I'm going to have it attach onto whatever, you know, the rod or the tube. It'll be permanent. I'll glue it in place. That's why I want to get a 7mm, because that opening is 7mm. So, and the wire, by the way, just to make sure you understand, is not inside of that opening. It's sandwiched in between. So it's not going to affect it in any way. It's a perfectly smooth opening that moves around independently. So what I'll do, let me get a rod or a tube and kind of demonstrate the idea here. All right, so imagine that this tube is the one that goes up into the space station. It's not going to be this long, but just imagine that it goes up into it. So this would be removable from here. And then we would take our slip ring and, okay, it's going to be permanently attached, but I'm just showing you how it would work. So it would be attached probably about here. The inner ring, which rotates, would be attached to this tube. It would stay glued permanently. So this whole part would not move up and down. It would be glued in a permanent position. Then I would have to put a bracket from this wood base out to connect to this part so it doesn't rotate with it. Otherwise it would tend to do that, since there's nothing holding it still. Once I get the inner part moving, it's not gonna, I don't want it to be moving around as well. And this isn't moving because it's not, it's a little bit bigger than this tube and it's not glued in place. And then of course, then what I would do is I would just attach the wire down onto this, take it up into the ship to power the ship. It would rotate with the rod and with the inner part of the slip ring. So none of this would tangle. And this would remain stationary. I could then run it through the base, through the wood, and connect it in. And make that connection. So, all right. So that's generally the idea of it. It allows the one side to rotate freely while the other side is stationary, so that you don't get a tangling of the wires. So, all right, I think that's going to work. I just have to finish out the logistics once I get the final base all done and everything like that. So, okay. All right, so I put together half of, well, the two halves of the completed ring for the space station. And basically this is just one, I believe it's just one part that's replicated 4 times. You can see where that connects together. So the way it's designed is one side of this is the female part and one side is the male part. And they just replicated it 4 times. And both of these halves obviously are identical. They have the same detail. So you just glue the 2 halves together and then you glue the 2 sides of it together to make the finished ring. So I'm going to be using the mask set for the windows from Ludel Meso, Aztec Dummy. There's little tiny windows. They're very deep. They're nicely indented. So his mask set has the little rectangles for all the windows on this, and also the little partial sections on the construction side. You don't have to necessarily light those, and I'm not going to, but as he did in his video, he still put the masks on them so you'd have the white window, you know, inside of the gray, so it looks like an actual window, as opposed to, you know, it doesn't have to be lit up, but it still gives it that different color than the gray, light gray of the station. But obviously we're going to light this ring here, and we're also going to light the docking bay, which I'll go over in the next video. So it's actually pretty straightforward. All I did was I took one long strand of SMD or LED strip tape, and I cut it to the right size. And then there's a lip right inside of this. It's a natural lip. So we don't need to light this bottom part, we just need to light the upper part, because that's where all the windows are. There are no windows down here. There are no windows on the inner or outer edge either, just along this strip, and also on the other side, of course. So I just need a strip of lights to shine up into this section here, and that's it. So what I did was, like I said, I just have one continuous strand, so I don't have to cut it and solder together even more pieces, more chances for a circuit to not work or something to break. So I have these 2 wires, just positive and negative, soldered onto one end of this. And I went back in with some 5-minute epoxy, you can see, and I just encased all of this and put some little dabs along it. Before that, I peeled off these are self-adhesive, so I peeled off the strip. And the bottom edge is adhered to that little groove that I mentioned. So it's actually on there pretty solidly. It's not going anywhere. So I didn't really feel the need to put any kind of sheet styrene or anything else in there. This isn't going anywhere. The 5-minute epoxy little dabs around it are just there to just tack it in place, so nothing's going to eventually come loose. And then it'll be sandwiched inside of the station. And then, of course, shining upwards all the way around. So it's plenty of light to light all of the windows all around it. And then what I ended up doing is, the interesting thing about the fact that, like I said, this is just one piece that's replicated 4 times, is that it was designed so it has this large pin connector and the small one. And on each side, of course, they're opposite. So, for example, you have this small one on the opposite side is a big one, and then a small one opposite to this one. So everything fits together. So when you put the top on, or the 2 sides on, they marry up. and they match where they're supposed to. And then the two halves will go together. But what I found was these big ones are fine because it's going to have the smaller one going inside, so this LED tape was not in the way. But this one, you can see that's pretty close to it. This part here trying to slide over it was giving me a problem. So what I did was, over on this side, all of those ones, I took a Dremel and just cut off about half of the inside of that pin connector. I just need it for placement. It's not what's really going to hold the ship together. It's just being able to position it. Right there, yeah. So now it fits together just fine. So let me go ahead and put that on and let me show you how that's going to look. All right, so now it goes together just fine. No problems at all, no gaps, no issues. And the beauty of this design, which is really great, is that the seam connecting these two sides is on the outer and the inner edge. And that's going to be totally covered by other parts of the kit. So there are other parts, once you glue these two halves together, there are parts that you put on the inside of this and on the outside of this that have detail. And so they're going to cover any seams. The only real seams are the two parts that, it's actually these ones, you can't even tell, because there's like a natural little line that goes there. But that's nicely masked. So no need to fill any seams in. It's all going to look very nice when it's all done. All right, so let me plug that in and show you how that's going to look. All right. So again, this is going to look a little bright. Well, actually looks pretty good on the camera. You can see how nicely lit up these little windows are. And that's really the only part that you're going to end up seeing. So I'm going to use the mask set to put the little vinyl rectangles into each of these windows all over the entire ring on both sides. And then I'll go over it with masking paint. I'm going to use black, and I'm thinking about using some silver. What I might do is use silver first because it tends to be pretty good at light blocking, and then go over it with black, because ultimately this is going to be a very light gray. So I don't want to try to mask over silver, because if I paint over the silver, then I don't want it chipping away and showing some metallic underneath. And the silver and the black are both going to just be enamel paints in a can. So what I'll probably do is get on some silver first of all to do some initial light blocking, let that dry, and then go over it with the black until I don't have any light showing through it all. Other than, then I'll remove the mask for the windows, and then you'll be able to see just the light glowing through the white plastic, which is translucent. And then of course these wires are going to go down through one of the spokes into the main hub and connect up with the power wires for the docking bay. And eventually there'll just be one set of wires that'll come out of the ship. All right, so looking pretty cool. Definitely coming together as far as how I'm going to light this outer ring. And these are being ran at 12 volts with a 12 volt adapter, and so will the motor, of course, be powered by 12 volts. So they'll both be ran into the same power onto the base. All right, let me just show you one more thing. Actually, I want to show two more things. Let me start with this. So here is the mask set from Lou Del Mesa, Aztec Dummy. It's a smaller set, but it's not really that costly. It's about $18. So it has all the little rectangles for the windows. It has the strips that go inside of and little squares and rectangles that go inside of the docking bay. Two sets of them to be able to light inside of that too. Same concept. Both are using the same principle. You simply mask off the white plastic, light block it, paint it the color you want it to be. And then when you pull the mask off, the light will shine through the back. There's an example of how that works. And of course the windows, which we're talking about. Okay, so definitely a time saver as far as getting to light all these windows without having to cut up little bits of tape. Some additional things that I got this steel tube, which is 7 millimeters. It has a 1 millimeter thick tube wall, which makes it nice and sturdy. And I got this this smaller, more streamlined connector. It has two over here. There's two on the other side. Little set pins with an Allen wrench that tighten onto it. Now I don't know why, it's very strange. So I got the 7 millimeter tube, which is the right size for the motor shank, which comes off. It's the same size. Could not find this with a 7 millimeter interior. There was a 6 millimeter, an 8 millimeter, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, so on. Not 7. None of the manufacturers made a 7 millimeter. Very strange. I don't know why that is, but I think it'll still work just fine. It still tightens down, and this is a solid tube. It's not going to crush under the tightening of the bolts. You just have to center it in there and tighten them down. And it snugs down just nicely on both that and the motor. So that's going to work a little bit better. And then this is just the right size for the slip ring that I showed to fit over it tightly. And ultimately, you know, if you imagine that this is the base and it's vertical like this, then I would have this coming off, and the slip ring would come down very close to this and be glued onto this tube, which goes into the ship, the station. And then it's removable. And then I'll have a bracket coming off of this onto the slip ring, and that'll hold that part of it in place. Let me just get that slip ring and show you that, how that's going to work. All right, so here's the slip ring. Slid down onto the steel tube. And now that I have the right size of it, it's a perfect fit. The interior of the inner ring is 7 millimeters, and so is this steel tube. So I just taped on the wiring along the tube to kind of give you an idea. Ultimately, what I will do is I'll carve a little hole into the tube itself right about here, run the wiring into it and up through the tube into the station. And that's how it will attach. And then this internal tube rotates independently than the outer tube. You can see here's the wires down here that move in a different direction than the ones up here. So the tube itself, which bolts down into this connector, will all be independent with this glued onto it and the wiring into the ship and everything as one part. So the entire station is going to rotate along with the tube and the slip ring and the motor down here. This part here then, that I want to remain stationary, I'll make a clip that attaches onto this and goes down and attaches onto the base once I get the final wood base that I want it to be. And that'll be removable as well, since this slip ring is going to be glued onto the tube on the inside. I want to make sure that the bracket as well can be removed. So what I'll probably do is glue the bracket onto the actual outer ring of the slip ring, come down, just a piece of metal, have like a tab, and then maybe some screws that screw in to hold it in place. And it really doesn't have to be too secure. The same with the inner ring. I'm going to use some CA to glue it onto the steel tube. They don't have to be that strong because these move very, very smoothly independently. So as long as they're just held in place, they're gonna rotate independently. And that way this wire then of course will have a disconnect, and then it'll go down into the base, so I can unplug that, pull this whole thing off with the station, and remove it for transport. So that's how that's ultimately going to work. And then the only part of this, of course, like I just said, that will not spin will be this outer ring that'll be held in place by a bracket. And then keep these wired connections from twisting together. So, okay, so definitely getting the concept down together. The lights are done for this finished ring. I can go ahead and get these two sides glued together, and then I'm going to get the inner panels and the outer panels and some parts that go along here as well glued onto place before I start doing any painting with the light blocking. But that'll be the next step that I'll do. All right, so quite a bit of progress on this build. I have the motor hashed out, how that's going to work, the slip ring. It's just a matter of getting those components together, getting them the way they're supposed to be. And also got the lighting done on the front ring, so I can begin to get that put together, get the other spokes, put onto it, and the center hub and those sorts of things, and start working on the docking bay lights. I want to get all of the main parts together because those are going to be painted black to light block, and then I'm going to do the lighter gray on them all before I do the back construction parts. There are parts on the back construction that are gray, but then a lot of those are the red. So those will be added after I do all the gray parts. So, all right. So thank you to all my new subscribers. Stay tuned on this build here, and I will see you in the next time.